Grunge, metal's bastardized cousin that lives across the railroad track that you don't really talk about until awkward family gatherings. When you have a genre that is as dark and demented and twisted and has such a reputation as metal, it is a feat of strength of sorts, a grand achievement to be able to outdo it in many departments when it comes to the broodiness, the moodiness, and the general edge and angst. But that's exactly what grunge did. The Seattle grunge scene and all of the bands that followed it would later spawn an entire movement that defined much of Gen X as well as the millennials, for lack of better terms, and would bleed into the culture of the 2000s with the alt-metal and alt-rock and post-grunge and nu metal movements taking major hints from grunge depending on the band you're talking about. But despite being cut from the same cloth and taking a lot of inspiration from metal music, grunge is not considered metal. You will get crucified by a lot of metalheads, even metalheads that love grunge, when it comes to grunge and metal. They are seen as two separate types of cake. One's red velvet, one's just a chocolate cake. They are still cake, but there is a noticeable difference between the two. And even some of the most well-acclaimed grunge bands, the Pearl Jams, the Nirvanas, the Soundgardens, the Audio Slaves, these are not considered metal bands at all. Are they adjacent? Did they inspire metal bands? Absolutely. But sticking out from the corpse pile of popular grunge, I'm not just talking about underground stuff, because that would be a whole different conversation. There's always a bunch of wackadoodles doing some extravagant fucking fiasco shit down in the underground that no one has heard of and mixing different genres together. Every beautiful thing comes from the underground and later spawns into an abomination. Any new movement, I promise, it spawned about 10 or 15 or more years ago in a place you probably have not heard of and know nothing about. Today, we are going to be talking about Alice in Chains. And this is a big deal for me because I love Alice in Chains. They were one of my favorite bands growing up. I own a lot of their discography on physical copy, and they are a major influence on a lot of the bands that I enjoy from the 2000s and 2010s. Now, while I could go into a deep dive about Alice in Chains as a whole, I'm specifically going to highlight one interesting thing. How the fuck did Alice in Chains break the boundaries of what grunge was to the point to where they are considered just as much of a metal band as they are a grunge band? If you're talking about like the big four, it's Soundgarden, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Alice in Chains. Alice in Chains were one of the biggest grunge bands, one of the ones that did the most numbers, one of the most influential. Jerry Cantrell is insanely influential when it comes to guitar playing, and obviously Lane influenced a ton of different vocalists. They were a very distinct and unique band, and that distinct nature of them is the exact reason that they not only stuck out like a damn sore thumb, but got to the point that they did in their career. So much so that when it comes to a lot of the alternative metal and alternative rock bands of the 2000s, I would say that Alice in Chains had more of an impact, a direct linkage to those bands than a band like Pearl Jam or a band like Nirvana would. But it's not like Alice in Chains just are a metal band through and through. They were one of the big four of grunge for a reason, and all of their music drips with a lot of the same contemporary ideas and sounds and aestheticism that was contemporary with the scene at the time. So why exactly was Alice in Chains considered a metal band as well? Well, most of it just comes down to the guitar playing specifically. Jerry Cantrell was insanely inspired by Black Sabbath. Specifically, Tony Iommi was the biggest influence on his guitar playing, and that kind of overlaps with grunge's moodiness and darkness because Black Sabbath was very influential in creating what would later be known as a lot of gothic metal and specifically doom metal, which is known for its sort of dirge-like compositions and sounding very forlorn and despondent and sad. And you can definitely hear a lot of that influence in Alice in Chains' music. Even some of their more stripped back and acoustic-led songs are a lot different and cut from a different cloth than what you got from a lot of the other grunge bands at the time. And the different influences doesn't even stop there. If you think that I'm crazy and you don't think Alice in Chains is metal, Jerry himself considers them a metal band more so than a grunge band. They never really liked the term grunge. Jerry straight up said that he considers them a metal band. A simple Google search back from 1996, Cantrell told Guitar World, "We're a lot of different things. I don't quite know what the mixture is, but there's definitely metal, blues, rock and roll, maybe a touch of punk. The metal part will never leave, and I never want it to." And the Edmonton Journal stated, "Living and playing in Seattle might have got them the grunge tag, but they've always pretty much been a classic metal band to the core." And those are just very simple searches. If you dive a little bit more into Jerry's influences as well as the idiosyncrasies of their sound, it is a melting pot, and while you can chalk them up to just grunge or metal, there's a lot of different things at play, and the blues isms and a lot of the harmonious instrumentation, and how Jerry approached his guitar writing, as well as the dual vocals, the way that harmony and melody played a role in how they did their vocals. It kind of counterbalanced a lot of what you were seeing at the time from, you know, the Eddie Vedders and the Kurt Cobains and stuff of the world, and the Chris Cornells, which had that very sort of like that grunge, gravelly, distorted sound. And obviously, Alice in Chains are not unfamiliar to the but listening to the other big four at the time and a lot of the big grunge tracks from both the big four as well as other grunge bands at the time, there's a stark difference in how diverse Alice in Chains is as a project. And I would go so far as to say they're not even just a metal band, because like I said, there's the blues influence, there's the punk isms, and the moody guitar tone that you would find in a lot of contemporary grunge at the time wasn't necessarily lost on Alice in Chains. A lot of those songs definitely drip of that sort of vibe, but it also has a lot of beautiful instrumentation, a lot of doom metal sort of passages, that sort of Black Sabbath-ism, that dirge-like instrumentation like I said, and also some very pretty moments that feel like some of the heavy metal ballads that you would get out of the 70s and the 80s from thrash metal bands and classic heavy metal bands. Some of their more stripped-back songs feel much more akin to the ballads that you got from those heavy metal bands and those thrash metal bands than they do the stripped-back songs from a project like Nirvana, for example. But it's obviously very intriguing because Alice in Chains was surrounded with a bunch of bands that people don't want to ever label as metal because they pay attention to that scene, and obviously Alice in Chains came from the right area, they dripped with that grunge influence, and I feel like definitively they're always going to be considered a grunge band above all else. But with that being said, you kind of have to respect how many influences that they have, and the influence they had on alternative metal and various metal offshoots. It really is incredible to see. But I want to know your guys' opinions of Alice in Chains, and do you consider them metal or not? You can let me know down in the comment section below. Agree or disagree, there is no wrong answer. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is, my name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.